What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast, CBS Sports and AFL Podcast. I'm Will Brinson. I'm your host. We got a Combine Recap podcast. This show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Joining me, John Breech, as he does basically until he gets his own kicking podcast and turns into a grumpy old man. Refuses to say no for a little while, and then we kick him off the podcast. Not that I'm referring to anybody else. And, of course, backed by popular demand, rising star, superstar, draft superstar, Josh Edwards. What's up, buddy? What's up, guys?
Josh, you look nice and tan from your trip to Indy.
You do look tan from your trip to Indy. You look svelte, tan, jacked.
You know what they say about Indianapolis? It's the grease of the Midwest. So very happy to be out. And honestly, there were a few days that felt fantastic. And then in the middle of the week, it got very frigid in the 40s. As you know, the wind there is just brutal because it just collects all that wind and holds it in. So, it was a good week in Indianapolis, but that's not where I got my son. That's for sure.
My dog George is wandering around looking for me. He hears me talking. He poked his head in three different rooms. So if something weird happens in here, it's George's fault. You were on site in Indy. Did you have any cocktail sauce? Any shrimp cocktails?
No, they passed them in the media room one time. I was off doing something else at the time, so I didn't get to do that. I've done it in previous years. It's not necessarily my thing.
I
do enjoy it.
It's like it's a landlocked state. There's signature item is seafood. I mean, come on.
I do enjoy a good shrimp cocktail, but the horseradish in that is just a little bit too much for my liking.
Wildly overpowering. Breech, we should start going back to the Combine. Why I don't know why we stopped. I love the Combine.
Well, I think you were banned from the city of Indianapolis, and
I've got some pretty good Combine stories. I'm not gonna lie.
I have made one trip in 10 years, and I am completely fine with that because the Combine always falls on the same weekend as my wife's birthday. Right. And as a matter of fact, the only time I ever got sent happened to be her 30th birthday, the one I didn't want to miss. And trust me, you don't want to miss the decade birthdays with your significant other. That is the lesson I learned that weekend.
Well, yeah, and I think that week we were doing a Pick Six show from the Combine, and that's probably why it happened. Anyway, yes. Let's get to some news. There's a bunch of stuff that happens. It's NFL news season. It's going to happen, and on Monday, the restaurant is St. Elmo's, is the steakhouse where they serve this insanely, and Harry and Izzy's, where it's basically a sister restaurant where they serve this insanely hot cocktail sauce. It's like it overpowers you and you start crying. I like it because I really like horseradish. But anyway, speaking of overpowering, Jason Kelce overpowered by emotion on Monday afternoon when he stepped to the microphone in Philadelphia and announced that the 7-time Pro Bowler is walking away from football. The famous podcaster, potentially Taylor Swift's brother-in-law, he is leaving and retiring from football. The Pro Football Hall of Fame has already tweeted out, keep your eyes out on 2029, which is kind of crazy to suggest, but he is probably almost certainly actually a first ballot Hall of Famer. Not that that. I mean, it does carry a little more gravitas. He's just he referenced it. He's called himself overrated in the speech, but he also referenced that he's been called the greatest center of all time, which it's a viable claim, Breech, and I think it's a big loss for the Eagles because this guy was playing at a really high level still.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy to look at what he was doing up until the final year of his career, and I think that's why this was such a difficult decision for him, because he has been effective despite having already played in the NFL for 13 years and despite being 36 and would have turned 37 at some point if he had played next season. But we're talking about a guy who was a first-team All-Pro 6 times. Brinson, you know how rare that is for a center to be an All-Pro 6 times? I believe he is the 5th center in NFL history, the entire history of the NFL, to have that done. So when you just look at that, you just don't see centers this talented and have this long of a career, this successfully come along very often anymore. But I will say, as soon as he showed up and got drunk at the Bills-Chiefs playoff game, I was 98% sure he was done because he was just having too much fun. There's no coming back from that. There is no, you put yourself out there and wearing Chiefs gear and obviously supporting your brother. But he just seemed to be enjoying himself too much to possibly, like his mind had already been made up.
Right, yeah,
Josh?
it did. Yeah, I was saying, Josh, it seemed like since basically the end of the season, he said, I'm not going to make my decision now, Josh. I mean, it feels like it's been a done deal. When you look at the Eagles' offensive line, I mean, do you think that what kind of drop off do you think we see here?
Well, there's going to be a drop off, certainly, because as you said, he was one of the best centers in football and has been for plus. He's been playing at that high of a level. I would imagine that the brotherly shove has taken a little bit of a toll on him over the past couple of years, but it is an interesting dynamic because some players, they wait too long to retire.
Yes.
The game has passed them by. That was not the case with Jason Kelce here. I mean, he was still arguably the top center in football this past season. Not only will his play on the field be missed, but so will his personality. So for that sake alone, I hope that he still sticks around the game of football, maybe even a little bit more than just the podcasting world. But, obviously one of the better personalities in football, very genuine, and the NFL needs more of that. So hopefully he is around in some capacity. But as far as the roster construction is concerned, Philadelphia has kind of been planning for this the past couple of years. He was very late in his career, so Howie Roseman knew at some point in time this was going to occur, and they've been able to make plans for that. So they went out, they got Cam Jurgens, a center from Nebraska in the draft, I believe a couple years ago now.
2022, yep.
2022, and then they got Landon Dickerson, who was also a center at Alabama. So they've got a couple of guys already on the roster that are certainly capable of stepping into that role. It's not going to be Jason Kelce, but certainly an adequate replacement for him. Better situation than a lot of teams would have when one of the best centers is walking away from football.
No, it's a great point. And I think the plan is to move Jurgens to center. Obviously, if that doesn't work out, Dickerson, as you know, has experience playing center at a really high level. So, I mean, they do have options. And I think that's really the hallmark. I think there's going to be drop off for the Eagles next year, just in terms of the brotherly shove. Is not going to be as good. I mean, Jason Kelce was really good at it. He's probably the greatest pulling center, maybe one of the greatest pulling offensive line. Triple Williams probably is a claim. That style, like being able to get out and get on the edge athletically, and to pull that way, he's maybe the greatest ever. I think you'll see a drop off in that run game and in that pass game. Shifting centers always, I guess, sort of an underrated aspect. We saw like when Justin Herbert added Corey Linsley, a little bit of a brief bump, but then you improve. I think it's going to affect Jalen Hurts. I do think, though, that you have to, like you talk about good organizations, smart organizations, they plan for these things. And by having a plan in place, you're not going out and drafting a center and be like, all right, dude, be good this year, like be good from Jump Street. So that's huge. He will definitely be involved in the podcast, and I'm sure he will be around football. The Kelce, the first family of football, the Kelces, I guess the Mannings and one of the royal families of football. Or is it the Matthews is the first family of football? Whatever. Or the Breeches.
Crazy fun fact, Jason Kelce from the University of Cincinnati played against Sean McVay when the two of them were in college.
That is a good fact. Cincinnati born, and New Heights is their show. Of course, check it out. If you're watching this podcast, you probably...
Brenton, Cincinnati College, Cleveland born. People in Cleveland.
Cleveland born, that's right.
Send you hate mail. If you mistake Cleveland with Cincinnati.
That's right, because he did point out in his speech too. Oh, yeah, just two more things that he pointed out. He said, I grew up as a Cleveland fan, and so I watched all my favorite athletes leave. He's like, hell, even if the whole team left, and then noted that he really wanted to play for one team his entire career. And so, the only way to control that is maybe to walk away a year before, you're actually physically done. I do think, though, that, you've heard, if you've heard him talk on the podcast, he's hinted at this pretty aggressively over the last 6 to 9 months. Particularly, really could have even retired after last year. I think his wife even mentioned this. She was surprised he came back. We've got a buzzing kicking situation in the NFL, Breech, a potential massive rule change. Break it down for us.
Brett, I must text you on Sunday so we can do an emergency podcast on this. That is how crazy this rule change is. the NFL trying to cut down on collisions, trying to cut down on concussion. So I'm going to give the simplified explanation of this new rule proposal, which will likely be voted on at the owners' meetings at the end of March. Number one, you have your kickoff team and your return team lined up about 5 yards away from each other. The kicking team will be lined up on the receiving team's 40-yard line. The receiving team will be lined up on the receiving team's 35-yard line. The only people who won't be on the 35 or the 40 are the kicker and the returner. The returner will be back near the goal line, wherever returners go. Kicker will be back at his own 30-yard line, where he will be kicking the ball. Those are the only two people who can move before the kick. Once the kick happens, the kicking team's tacklers, the coverage team, cannot go for the returner until he catches the ball or until the ball bounces inside the 20-yard line. So this is a lot of rules, right? Okay. So now, then you're also introducing 3 kind of touchback options. If the ball does not make it to the receiving team's 20-yard line, it is considered out of bounds. The receiving team gets it at the 40-yard line. If the ball is kicked into the end zone on the fly or out of the end zone, you get a touchback, but you get it at the 35-yard line. And then finally, if the ball lands inside the receiving team's 20-yard line, rolls into the end zone, you get a touchback, but at the 20-yard line. So the difference in touchbacks is because the NFL is trying to discourage kickers from kicking out of the end zone because they want to see more returns. And then finally, the onside kick will effectively be going away unless you are trailing in the fourth quarter. And the only way you can do it is you have to let the officials know you're going to attempt an onside kick, and then the other team will know that you are attempting an onside kick. So there are no more surprise onside kicks. My quick takeaway all this is that I am not a huge fan of this rule. When the XFL implemented it, they implemented it with a 4th and 15 play instead of an onside kick. So basically, the NFL is taking the XFL rule, kind of stealing part of it, and then they're adding their own little nuances to the rule, which make it worse. There's a reason the XFL did not have onside kicks because it doesn't make sense with this rule. Surprise onside kicks, much more successful than regular onside kicks. So it just seems like kind of they took a pretty good rule the XFL had and made it worse is my giant takeaway from this.
So in other words, like every time there's a kickoff, it's like 3 things could happen in terms of the ball placement. Josh, do you have, could you right now, if I told you a ball landed somewhere, would you know where to place the ball based on what Breech just explained? Because me either.
Yeah. No, but I will say he did the best job of explaining that anybody could have possibly done. And he acted like it's been a rule for years. I mean, I could have never done that. So I was pretty amused just listening to it.
Did you hear my setup? I was like, hey, Breech, there's a kicking thing. Tell us about it. Like, I'm not even trying to act like I know what's going on here. I think what is the goal here? They want more kickoffs, but less onside kicks?
More returns, but with less collisions, fewer collisions, so that since the return team and the coverage team are only 5 yards apart, they're not going to be running at each other at full speed because you don't have time to get up to full speed. So that is the end game, is to cut down on the collisions, but it's just a very weird...
This is a wildly and unnecessarily complicated.
Right. I mean, people had trouble understanding overtime in the Super Bowl because it had never been done before. Now you're talking about a rule that has 3 different touchbacks. And the other thing is this rule was in effect with XFL kickers. NFL kickers are much better than XFL kickers. So this becomes a situation where I think we'll see special teams coaches ask their kickers to kick kind of a lower line drive that lands in the middle of the field around the 18-yard line. Because if you get that, the returner has no idea where the ball's now in fair play. The returner has no idea where it's going to bounce. And as long as it doesn't go out of bounds, the coverage team will be in good shape.
So wait, if the ball is kicked through the end zone,
then a touchback at the 35-yard line for the receiving team.
Okay. And if the ball is kicked into the land, like if the guy catches it in the end zone, 35-yard line.
Yes.
If the ball is kicked short of the end zone, but rolls into the end zone, the ball's at the 20. So in other words, like if the ball, if the kickers land it short, they're going to have to return it because otherwise you're at the 20.
Right. And like, if they're going to have all these crazy rules, I would say they should add if the kicker kicks it through the uprights, then the touchback is moved back to the 15. And the reason that would make this rule even cooler is because if the kicker goes for that and misses, Well, the touchback's gonna be at the 35, so there would be some because they.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I do kind of like the idea of like gamifying the kickoff a little bit, but this is so there's just really two. What was the thing you said about being treated like it's out of bounds? If it
so if the kickoff does not make it to the receiving team's 20-yard line, so
gotcha. Yeah.
It lands at like the 23, then
and like so if the guy kicks it, lands at the 23 or lands at the 20 and spins backwards, then they get the don't touch it. You get it at the 40.
Right. And so that's why the onside kick is effectively eliminated unless you alert the ref in the fourth quarter when your team's trailing, is because you have to kick it past.
That I see what you're saying. So that's like if you try an surprise onside kick and they don't touch it, they get it. All right, interesting. Okay,
right.
Is this gonna pass? Did it pass?
I mean, you have multiple special teams coordinators who worked on this. John Fossil, who's one of the most respected in Dallas. Yeah, Bones. So you had, I think, 8 special teams coordinators who kind of iron this rule out. So I would think their owners would at least vote for this because it would be kind of a slap in the face if they didn't. So now you only need 24 votes, so you're 1/3 of the way to.
I guess, man, but like, I mean, look, we're reasonably intelligent. Right. Young people. We're like Josh and I are like no, like you're like I don't know if I want to like deal with you have to do 500 radio hits just to explain this to the country.
And you're adding like a seperate rule book for kickoffs. I mean, it's insane.
Josh and I are like like these owners are gonna be like, oh cool, this is confusing. Let's do it. You know, like I could see this being tabled or like some form of it being utilized. And then like tabled for 2025, and then they're like, "Nah, this is ridiculous."
Or at best, if they do approve it, I think it would just be a 1-year trial,
or even like they did with
preseason
trial. Or remember they did I don't know why.
The extra point was a preseason trial first.
Yeah, but they also
back to 33.
Remember 1 year they like changed like pass interference.
Yeah,
they're like
you could review it.
Yeah. They're like, all right. That's
after the Saints Rams NFC title game.
Yeah, that's right.
And then they got rid of it because they're like, yeah, this is not a good rule.
Right. Mike Evans. I don't want to put him in the Hall of Fame yet. Ryan Wilson will get mad at me, but I mean, man, the guy's got the longest streak of 1,000 yards to start a career in each season. He agreed to terms with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming back to Tampa on a 2-year, $52 million deal with $35 million guaranteed. Suffice to say, this is awesome for Tampa Bay. They got one of their key free agents. We have the tag deadline tomorrow. The show's gonna be at 4:30 tomorrow. Just FYI, if you're a regular in the YouTube chat or you're wondering where it is in the Spotify feed, we're gonna do it in the afternoon. We'll do the tag show in the afternoon after the tag deadline and sort of break down those guys. Mike's at 4:00. Thank you, Harry. Mike Evans said that he wants to be a Buck for life, and this won't get him there, Josh, but it'll get him a little bit closer. And I think if you're Tampa Bay, when you have Antoine Winfield Jr., Baker Mayfield, and Mike Evans as three key free agents, being able to get Evans back in the fold before the new league year begins, a big step for a team that, quite frankly, is probably still the best team in the NFC South.
No question. I listened to Bucks general manager Jason Light at the podium early last week.
Funny guy.
He's very funny. Somebody asked him about a report that said they were still pretty far apart in negotiations with Mike Evans. He kind of gave a little bit of smirk and said, I don't know if you've seen, reports since, but we're a little bit closer than the report that you're citing. So that led me to believe that they felt pretty comfortable in where they were in negotiations with Mike Evans. Now they've got him re-signed. You can move on to Baker Mayfield, who is also expected to hit free agency. Most people assume Mayfield was going to go back to Tampa Bay. This week, we heard a little bit more chatter that there's going to be some other teams interested, perhaps Atlanta, Minnesota, depending upon what happens with Kirk Cousins there. So there's going to be some teams interested in the services of Baker Mayfield. And now that you've got Mike Evans back in Tampa Bay, that's a little bit more of an enticing option if you're Mayfield looking for a possible landing spot in free agency.
Yes, Evans. Look, it blows my mind that the Buccaneers didn't get something done beforehand. It feels like they thought, hey, Mike's 30. This is when receivers kind of start to slow down a little bit. So we're going to take a risk here and hope he doesn't play out of his mind in 2023.
And he did.
And he did. He leads the NFL in touchdown receptions, has another 1,000-yard season, has great chemistry with Baker Mayfield. And at that point, you just kind of have to make the bed you slept in there if you're Jason Light, where, all right, well, we have to pay Mike Evans. And as our guy, Joel Corey, former NFL agent, pointed out, is that this effectively makes Evans the second highest paid receiver in the NFL. You'll see other contracts are higher, like Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, but they kind of have that dummy year at the end where they probably won't get that money and an extension will be. So for all intents and purposes, Evans now has the second highest average annual value. And look, the Buccaneers probably could have gotten this done, but again, they were probably afraid to. So now you have him under contract at a high price, and you have to hope he keeps up and looks like he did this past season.
I feel pretty comfortable with Mike Evans performing at a high level, assuming you get the quarterback back. And I do think Josh is spot on, noting that getting Mike Evans in the fold is going to make it more likely to bring Baker Mayfield back. I think that Jason Light has, credit to him for building this sort of roster in the, or continuing with the roster in the post Tom Brady era, that a guy like Mike Evans wants to come back. And by the way, Mike Evans is massively involved in the Tampa Bay community from a charitable standpoint. So it's not surprising to me at all that he would want to return. But I also think, with Todd Bowles there, they win the division. Nobody was picking him to win the division. Everybody picked the Saints, your Falcons, your Panthers. I think there is a bit of an underdog role. Now, there was a report from Diana Rossini that Baker Mayfield would not take a hometown discount. You know what I mean? Like he's not going to give the Bucs a discount just because they were the ones who brought him in and improved his play. He wants to get paid like a quarterback should. And yeah, Mike Evans now the second highest paid wide receiver. The Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams deals, those are, again, like as Breech said, the dummy years, the numbers are funky. And I think it's important to know, too, that this really sets the stage for T. Higgins and Mike Pittman and other wide receivers out there, veteran wide receivers who are hitting free agency, like what they'll be paid. You're not going to go to that 30 million mark per year. The agents have sort of realized that it's going to be in that 26, 27, 28 range. And I think we'll see a bit of a sort of a trickle back to that number. All right.
And real quick,
yeah.
You mentioned Baker Mayfield not taking a hometown discount. He just played on a 1-year, $4 million contract.
Yeah.
The Buccaneers already got the hometown discount because you got a starter at such a dirt cheap price. I think he ended up making $7 or $8 million with incentives, but whatever, for a starting quarterback, that's a discount. So there's no reason for Baker Mayfield to give them any sort of discount.
No, for sure. And I do think he ends up back in Tampa. There's going to be interest in Baker. He played well, but I think his comfort level in Tampa and having Mike Evans back there, even with Dave Canales gone, I think will entice him to come back. All right, let's take a break.
I will say, real quick. I will say that this kind of a signing is really important for the locker room as well, because we've seen instability at the head coaching role. We've seen instability at the quarterback position. The one staple has been Mike Evans. So to reward a guy like that in your own locker room that has consistently done it at a high level and been a true professional in your locker room, I think that sends a message to the rest of the guys there, because, you've got Baker Mayfield now. You bring in Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator who worked with Mayfield in Los Angeles.
Yep.
Now you're kind of hoping to work towards a little bit of that.
Kentucky guy.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, winners and losers from the 2024 NFL Combine next.
Who's in? Who's out? Let the madness begin. The NCAA Men's Basketball Championship Selection Show on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
All right, time to talk some winners and losers from the Combine. And look, I don't just as a heads up, I have a school pickup situation. So in a little bit, I'm going to if I just so people who are listening are jarred by my sudden departure, I'll let you know when I leave, but probably after the next break. Anyway, let's dive into the Combine winners and losers from the quarterback and the wide receiver position. We got nothing from Caleb Williams, not even medicals. I think you could make the argument though that maybe like Caleb Williams kind of wins because he's like, I'm not even giving you my medicals, and it's probably smart. Only one team's going to draft you. It's going to be the team in number 1 overall. You don't need to give your medicals to 31 other teams. Interesting approach. Marvin Harrison, of course, didn't do anything and no showed his presser, was apparently, according to Chris Carter, in some sort of MRI situation. I don't know. Drake May, Jaden Daniels did not throw. Josh, give me a winner from the wide receiver group.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I will say you're right about Caleb Williams. I think he probably was a winner considering the narrative around him coming into the week, the fact that most kind of thought he was a little bit self-absorbed, a little emotional based on how he reacted post-game this year. I think he was a big winner because he was able to show his personality and handle some of those questions that were asked of him this year. But from the wide receiver position, I thought Florida's Ricky Pearsall did really well, looked really crisp in the drills. I thought that he was going to run slower than he did in the 40-yard dash, ended up running in the 4.4. So really consistent player that checked that box for me. I thought he did fantastic. Xavier Worthy, that was the talk of everybody on Saturday, is how fast he ran. Of course, setting the combine record with a 4.21 second 40-yard dash, breaking the previous record set by John Ross in 2017. Now the question is, how high is he going to go?
Yeah.
Because John Ross went number 9 overall to Breech's Bengals. Xavier Worthy
one spot ahead of who was he taking one spot ahead of? Who was it?
Subject, Brinson. We don't talk about anymore.
Who went 10th in that draft? Who went 10th in that draft? Was it Patrick Mahomes?
His name rhymes with Brat Mahomes.
Yeah. But look, by the way, John Ross, I thought was a really good prospect. He just injuries derailed his career. But what's interesting, Josh, I think, is with Xavier Worthy breaking that record. Like, is he a first round? Do we think he's a first round prospect because of that? Like, he's now.
I think he's still a fringe first round prospect. I thought the tape was pretty good. So he was in that conversation previously. The fact that he has tested as well as he did certainly helps that. But at the same time, I think everybody could tell that he was fast on tape. So it's like, how much does that really shape your opinion?
Right.
He's definitely going to get boosted up a little bit. I would be taking the, I guess, the under as far as where he's projected to be drafted right now. But I don't know if it shapes where his projection is, too much.
I think we get real caught up in the speed of, I think Matt Waldman, who does a great job with his rookie scouting portfolio, called speed. The 40-yard dash is the cleavage of the of draft season, because you're drawn in, you're enticed by the 40-yard dash, and ultimately, like, it doesn't mean anything. There's a lot of pushback on #draft Twitter. I don't know if you saw this or not, Josh, but Breech, I'm sure you did, just being at home and watching it, where people were firing up lists of guys who ran like a 40-yard dash, because the thing with Worthy is he's only 5'11", 165. Like, that is rail thin. And so it's great that he's fast, but the list of guys who have had, I think it's 1,000 yards. There's like one guy out of like 40 guys who ran a sub 4.40, weighed less than 175 or something, or maybe way less than 200. I can't remember what the exact number was. But I mean, like, that's definitely a concern when you start talking about this guy, even though I agree completely. He's a winner. He broke the combine record for the 40-yard dash, and it was an explosive moment, awesome moment. But, I do think you have to worry about that a little bit, Breech.
Yeah. And to your point, Brinson, as I can personally attest to with the John Ross draft pick, is that these receivers who come away with these blazing fast 40s, it does look sexy. And I do think it does help their draft stock, obviously. And I mean, there was literally a full decade where the running joke was whoever ran the fastest 40 at the combine was going to get drafted by the Raiders. We saw them take Jacoby Ford and Darius Hayward-Bay, and even, oh my gosh, Henry Ruggs ran a blazing fast 40. So you had just all these guys who are running under 4.3. But the fact of the matter is that rarely does this translate to success on the field. And as Josh has mentioned, Worthy's probably a first-round prospect. And so, not a bunch of these guys that run 4.3 and under are getting drafted in the first round. There's Ruggs and Hayward-Bay, as we just mentioned. There's John Ross. And I think Dante Stallworth back in 2002. Those are your four guys who ran 4.28 or faster and got drafted in the first round. So it's not a huge subset of people, but man, it's stacked against you. The odds are stacked against you because guys rarely have found success when they end up running this fast at the combine.
And so Scott Barrett DFB on Twitter, really good follow. But he posted a list of top wide receivers. By the way, he also posted, this is the fastest wide receiver group in combine history. Average 4.44. That is wild how fast that is. But he did a speed score, which is a weight adjusted 40 time. And I mean, I realize it's like, 40 is the 40, but it's like, if you're running a 40 at like 235 pounds, it's obviously it's more impressive than doing it at 165. And the speed score puts Xavier Worthy at 9 versus Xavier Leggett at number 1, and then Brian Thomas and Adonai is it Adonai?
Yeah, you can just call him AD too. That works.
And AD Mitchell at 2 and 3, both guys who are also winners in your book, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to look at Texas for one of the other winners in this draft class because AD Mitchell was one of them. He measured about 40 pounds heavier than his teammate, but ran a 4.3. What was it? 4.34?
4.43 for him.
I thought it was a little bit lower than that. But
Brian Thomas 4.33, Mitchell 4.43. I think is what Harry wrote down.
But he jumped out of the gym as well, So it wasn't just like he ran fast. He showed those explosive traits in the vertical and the broad jumps as well. Just a really fantastic showing. When you look at his size, 6'2", 205 pounds. He looks a lot more like one of those X-wide receivers in today's NFL. So that's going to translate pretty easily to the next level. You look at Brian Thomas Jr., just an incredible athlete, of course, running very fast in his own right, 4.33 in the 40-yard dash.
By the way, I don't know if you saw what Harry posted, but 4.34, you were right. And Harry, don't worry about it. You're doing 50 million 40 times. It's easy to get those flip-flop. But yeah, 4.34 for Adonai Mitchell, the third fastest time overall behind Brian Thomas and Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of thought that was the case because of how noteworthy it was. To have that much of a weight difference over your teammate and still run, a little less than 1/10 of a second slower is fantastic. But Brian Thomas Jr., just a guy that's going to be able to win downfield in contested catch situations, somebody that I still think has his best football ahead of him. He's going to be a first-round pick all day, and he's one of the guys that really helped himself in this draft class, which, there's a ton of them. There's like 10 of them that could go in the first round at this point. And that's why it's not necessarily so easy to just automatically say Xavier Worthy is a first-round pick.
Right, exactly. It's like who's at the back end of the first round? What's their preference in terms of what they like to draft? Does he fit the analytics stuff for that team, et cetera? Like, is it, Chiefs are picking 32. Do they trade out? I mean, they certainly need wide receiver help, but Andy Reid hasn't really spent a ton of first round picks on wide receivers. I think Jeremy Maclin might be he didn't draft Dwayne Bowe, so Jeremy Maclin might be the only one. Andy Reid's ever done because Deshaun Jackson was a second round pick. I have to look that up. But anywho, quarterbacks, Breech. Were you impressed by the quarterbacks who were out there, J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix, notable winners on Josh's list?
You know what I would say is that I was a little worried about J.J. McCarthy there at the beginning because I would say the quarterbacks are the people I watched the most.
He doesn't appear to be an ambi thrower.
Yeah, it was like, oh my God, this is not how you want to start. But he ended up throwing pretty well. I would say Michael Penix Jr. I'm glad he is on your list, Josh, because he was probably his throwing style is just so unique in the sense that everything he throws is a dart. And when people throw like that, you worry about their accuracy, but he went out there and looked fantastic. He's one of those people that I'm not sure where teams would have had him on the board before the combine, but now that you're getting, now that you get that up close look, and again, they'll get it at his pro day, but I think he becomes a surefire first round pick instead of maybe on the fringe of being a first round pick.
Man, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I think that like it's worth reiterating. By the way, he started, do you know how many pass attempts Michael Penix Jr. had in college?
4.2 million, somewhere in there.
1,685. That is wild. That dude was in college he played 6 years of college football. A lot of these guys hit, with the COVID stuff. So he is older and he's got a injury history. I'll be curious to see how those medicals shake out. We talked about that before the combine. I think you're probably right. I think he's probably a first rounder, Breech, but it's also like, how many times did you hear the phrase, this guy's a top 10, this guy's a top 15, like this guy's a first rounder? It's like there's only 32 picks in the first round. I'll just be curious to see. And again, it comes down to what a teams need, who's on the back end. Do teams want to trade back into the first round to get that 5th-year option? Is it a team like Seattle that loves to trade down and, could be looking to maybe get somebody to come in behind Geno Smith eventually? I'm not sure the problem with Penix is like, can he be a guy that a team without a starter drafts and it's like, oh, we'll just let him sit for a year or two? He's like all of a sudden 27. I mean, it's it's a tricky situation, but he threw the ball really well. I mean, just against air, obviously, but a great thrower of the football.
Yeah, I had to write the article, winners and losers from the quarterback position for CBSSports.com. To be honest with you, I didn't think that anybody really shaped the narrative for better or worse too much this year. I thought Michael Penix did what he needed to do. I thought J.J. McCarthy did what he needed to do, but I don't know that anybody necessarily really hurt or, helped their draft stock this year.
Some of the McCarthy stuff, like just irrespective of how he performed, like you hear, there was a report. Somebody said JJ McCarthy's in play at number 2, and that's crazy. Like, I mean, JJ McCarthy won a national title. Don't get me wrong. Drake May won 8 games at Carolina with a ton of talent around him, and I have questions about Drake May. But I mean, if you're picking between JJ McCarthy and Drake May, give me Drake May all day.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the discussion here, because now that we're JJ McCarthy as a possible top 10 pick. If you have 4 quarterbacks go in the top 10 and you're still seeing the Broncos, the Raiders, the Vikings, teams like that in the middle part of the first round, there's going to be a lot of teams that need a quarterback. So if 4 go in the top 10,
Michael Penix is probably a first rounder, right?
Yeah, and the same conversation with Bo Nix from Oregon does this create a little bit of more urgency in the middle part of that first round where you could see a 5th or a 6th quarterback taken there, or does somebody trade back up into the bottom of the first round to get that player? A year ago, we were having a similar conversation once Will Levis started to slide down the board a little bit. We later found out that the Titans did try to trade into the bottom of the first round to take Levis, but he didn't end up being taken until the top of the second round. So to your point earlier, we always act like there's certainly going to be 5 quarterbacks or 4 quarterbacks in the first round. But the reality is, some of these guys tend to slide a little bit.
Yeah, I think we can see like the number in Vegas open up at 4.5, and then suddenly the under becomes like heavily like minus 250 when it starts to seem like somebody could slip out. But yeah, I mean, it feels, and then like you've also heard JJ McCarthy's above Jaden Daniels. And that's stuff that's coming out of the combine. And I think it's important to remember that with the combine, a lot of times, media. So I mean, it's just a reality. Media and fans. So the media is playing catch up to a degree to these teams and these scouting departments who have been doing all this stuff, and the media has mostly been covering the NFL season, and now it's like, oh, and like, dude, like these head coaches are playing catch up too. Like they're diving into it with their scouting department. That's what they're doing as a full time job right now. It's just fascinating because it's not as simple as like, all right, like this is set in stone. This is where it's all shifting right now.
There's also teams that want their own narrative out there because it could help that certain player land with their team. They may try to push a negative narrative about a player in the hopes that player falls. So you do have to take what you hear with a little bit of a grain of salt. Absolutely. Because everybody has their own agenda in this process. You're hearing stuff from agents. They've got their own agenda. They want their player to go higher so they get more money. You see teams where they put stuff out there that is on the negative side because they want a player to fall. It's this give and take during the draft cycle that, I do think you have to have your antenna up a little bit as you hear some of this stuff come out of the combine.
For sure. All right. Tight ends and running backs very, very quickly because I've got to go get a small child. Who hurt themselves in the tight ends and the running backs, Josh? Losers.
Well, I think one that hurt himself a little bit for me personally was Jatavian Sanders from Texas. I thought he was going to run a little bit faster than he did. I believe it was a 4.69 40-yard dash, which when you look at what Ben Sinnott did at Kansas State, when you look at, Brock Bowers and his potential in this draft class, some of the other guys that helped themselves, those guys were able to separate themselves a little bit. Whereas Sanders, he was a part of that cluster. Now he might find himself at the bottom of that cluster, which is a difference of millions of dollars over the course of a 4-year contract.
Yeah, for sure.
So running the time that he did was a little bit of an eye opener. It's probably going to send me back to the tape just to make sure I wasn't missing something. But you wish he would have ran a little bit faster there in Indianapolis.
All right. Tell you what, let's take a break. And then Breech is going to drive this car home, park it in the garage. And look, I'm actually disappointed because what I'd like to do is talk about linebackers. And you know who? Peyton Wilson blew up the combine on on Friday night. That was a delight watching him on Friday night. But I'll let you guys talk about it, and you can do that, including defenders, winners, and losers, coming up after the break. Next.
We need your sports news anywhere.
We've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back. Brinson is gone, as he said. I think, Josh, it's because he fell asleep Friday night and didn't actually get to see any of the pass rushers, linebackers, or defensive backs. He's getting old. You go to bed at 8, and the combine's in prime time. You miss some key things. But we are going to talk about some winners and losers on the defensive side of the ball. And hopefully your brain's not completely fried because, again, this did happen on Friday, 72 hours ago for you, which feels like 600 hours in Indianapolis time because you don't get any sleep and you're watching 200 prospects and you're just trying to function. So let's start with your pass rushers. Give me a winner right there.
It's tough to give you one winner because the group as a whole really excelled. Dallas Turner, the top prospect at the position, I thought really held his own. Running the 40-yard dash in 4.4 seconds, checked every box you needed him to check. I will say that Jared Verse, the pass rusher from Florida State, probably helped himself the most in my eyes because when you watch his tape, he's a player that wins with power, started to show his best football down the stretch there with the Seminoles, and then to come to Indianapolis and test the way that he did, I thought was fantastic. He had a 4.58 second 40-yard dash, 35-inch vertical jump. So he was testing very well. 7.31 second 3-cone drill, which, measures your ability to change direction, your agility, things of that nature. You wanted to see that a little bit lower. But for me, knowing that he was a rusher built on power and then seeing those athletic numbers gave me a little bit more confidence in projecting him to the next level.
Now, when you think of someone as a winner, did you walk into the combine thinking, hey, Jared Verse is maybe a top 25 pick. Now he feels like a top 20 or top 15 pick? Or do you still feel similar, but you won't be surprised if he's taken higher than you think now?
Coming into the draft, I thought he was probably in that 20 range. Coming out of the combine, rather, I think he's very much in the mix for top 10. I think he could be the first edge rusher off the board. I don't necessarily see it that way, but I do believe that some teams will. And that's the difference of, millions of dollars over the course of a 5-year contract. So in that sense, he not only helped himself from, a potential standpoint, but he helped himself financially as well. So he was definitely one of the big winners. Chop Robinson from Penn State, another one of those guys. Leatu Latu, I think, we may talk about it at some point, but, had a fairly solid workout.
All right, let's go to linebackers, and I'm just going to spoil it because I think one of your winners is Peyton Wilson, which I hope for your sake is one of your winners because Brinson will literally hunt you down, shave you head, tie you up, and put you in a closet if you do not have Peyton Wilson as a winner because that's his favorite college player of all time. Is Peyton Wilson one of your winners at linebacker?
I'll be honest with you. There was a part of me that thought about not mentioning Peyton Wilson just to spite Brinson when he listened back to this. To not have an NC State Wolfpack linebacker mentioned on his podcast would be kind of funny, but I can't do it. I mean, it would just be a disservice to the player. He tested so well. Had a make sure I got my notes here. 4.43 second 40-yard dash, 34.5-inch vertical jump. So he tested fast. He tested explosive. This is a player that had 2 torn ACLs when he was at NC State. He had a significant shoulder injury, but that was a couple of years ago. So now he's got a couple of years where he has shown that he can stay healthy, and it gives you a little bit more confidence in him possibly holding up in the NFL. I will say that the medical check is going to be very important for him, but really happy to see a player that has been through so much adversity through his college career now come to this stage, excel, and really help himself financially.
Yeah, and it's interesting with linebackers because of everything they're asked to do. They're playing side to side. You see them drop back in coverage now, coming up to stop the run. They're doing everything. And so for Peyton Wilson to kind of come out and show his athleticism, I mean, his 4.4340, I think the second fastest linebacker was 4.47 in the 40. So you're talking about, and then no one else was faster than 4.5. So we're talking about, he kind of blew away the field there. Not that the 40 is an end all be all for linebackers, but very interesting there. And the thing is, we're talking about edge rushers and how Jared Verse might be a top 15, top 10 pick now. And the top guys on that list are all first rounders. When you're talking about the best linebacker, they're more day two guys, right? Like they're likely to be drafted on day 2 versus day 1.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit of buzz that Texas A&M's Edgerrin Cooper could get into the first round. I don't think he's going to go quite that high, although he is my top-rated linebacker. But again, that's why it was so important for Wilson to test well, because once you get past Cooper, it is kind of a cluster there at the position. You got Michigan's Junior Colson. You've got Trevin Wallace from Kentucky really helped himself. So there's like a small group of players that are in that next tier. And I think Wilson, certainly asserted himself in that group. So when you're trying to separate these players from one another, he's somebody that helped himself, and that could, be the difference in 20 selections in the draft.
All right, let's move on to cornerbacks, which I'm happily moving on to, because literally nothing makes me happier than life than seeing a player from the Mid-American Conference just go in. Yeah, you're in MAC country. And as a MAC guy, I think there was a MAC guy who did pretty well at the combine and maybe even helped the stock.
I would go a step farther. I think Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo, has helped himself throughout this entire draft process. Not even just the week in Indianapolis. I mean, you go back to the Senior Bowl and what he was able to show against a higher level of competition. That was one of the big concerns about him, because coming from the MAC, he'd only played a couple of games against Power 5 competition. So how would he fare against that level of competition at the Senior Bowl? He did very well. He more than held his own. He's got 6 interceptions over the past 2 years, somebody that had great ball production, but then to come to Indianapolis and test as well as he did, 4 points, 3.3 second in the 40-yard dash, 38 vertical jump. Again, just checked all of the boxes that you would want to see from a number 1 cornerback in the NFL. So when you're looking at that top cornerback in this draft class, Alabama's Terrion Arnold is in that conversation, but there's no question that Mitchell is surging upwards after what he did in Indianapolis.
And I mean, he could be a top 10 pick theoretically, right? It feels like he's looked that good over the past month or so.
Yeah, he absolutely could. I think over the course of this podcast, we probably said about 20 players could be top 10 picks at this point in time, but Mitchell is one of them. You've got a couple of edge rushers that could get in there. You've got 3 wide receivers that could get in there. You got 3 to 4 quarterbacks. So there's only so many spots that can be top 10 selections. But in terms of that caliber of player, I do think Mitchell is certainly on the border of being top 10 overall pick worthy.
It is crazy with the defensive players, how it does feel like this is going to be a totally offensive draft, in the sense of offensive linemen and receivers are going to be 24 picks in the first round. Quarterbacks are going to be 4, and then spread. And I'm exaggerating with offensive line receivers, but it feels like they're going to fill up a good chunk of that first round. All right. Was there anyone on the defensive side of the ball who left you wanting a little more? Maybe you weren't as impressed with as you thought you would be.
So for me personally, Austin Booker, the edge rusher from Kansas, is one that I expected more of. On tape, I thought he was going to be, 250 pounds plus, measured 240 pounds in Indianapolis, still a relatively young player. He is just got 1 year of playing experience, essentially, since transferring from Michigan. A player that has great length, was used situationally for the Jayhawks. I expected him to do a little bit more. He ran, I believe, a 4.79 40-yard dash at the combine. Again, I thought it would be a little bit quicker. So I think for me personally, I expected to see more. I wanted to see more, but I didn't. I know Leatu Latu from UCLA is one that is often mentioned in this context from people. I didn't come into this thinking that he was a phenomenal athlete. I thought he was a good athlete, and I think he showed that. One of the finer technicians in this draft class, incredibly productive player that can win at the point of attack with a couple of different moves. I think he's still in that 15 to 20 range when it's all said and done in this draft class. But I would say Booker, for me personally, was one that I was disappointed by.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously you have the thing about if you do struggle at the combines, you still have your pro day. There's still plenty of time for you to kind of get your stock back up. So I don't think too many players panic. But you definitely don't want to leave that because you do have all 32 teams there kind of watching you. All right, Josh, now we're going to talk about people who crushed the combine. I'm sure you remember last week when you were on the show, all three of us made some predictions about who would crush the combine. And surprisingly, we did pretty well. I didn't think we would go 3 for 3, but somehow we did. Your pick was Dallas Turner. Brinson, of course, picked Peyton Wilson because that is the only college player he knows or follows. And I took J.J. McCarthy. So now we're going to take a look at who did the best at moving up the draft boards from their combine performance. And this crushing the combine segment is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Josh, how did Dallas Turner? Did he crush the combine? How far up did he move?
Yeah, he crushed the combine. I mean, to no one's surprise, a former 5-star recruit that went to Alabama was everything that we thought he would be here in Indianapolis. Running a sub 4.5 40, jumping 40 and a half inches. He did everything that we thought he would. I mean, he's still a relatively young player, just turned 21 years old. So even though he didn't always play like a dynamic edge rusher for the Crimson Tide, I still think his best football is still ahead of him. So he's probably still going to go in a similar range, that top 12, top 10 overall area, but somebody that cemented his stock there, because if he hadn't tested well, we're talking about, him slipping into the first round, later in the first round. So he's somebody that had a lot to lose, but cemented himself as that upper echelon prospect.
So maybe he could have fallen to the bottom 20s with an ugly performance, but instead feels like top 15 type guy.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yep.
So obviously Brinson's pick here is Peyton Wilson, as we already said. And, I'll just ask you specifically because we spent a lot of time on him, but how much do you think he helped himself? Like what range do you think he was in before the draft? Was he a 70 to 80th pick and now he's 40 to 50? How much do you think he bumped himself up?
Coming into the combine, I think he was around 80 to 90 for me. And now I'm toying with the idea of top 60. So that's a pretty significant leap over the course of a week. Again, it means a lot for him in terms of money. But when you consider what he did stacked up against the other linebacker prospects in this class, it's easier to defend him than it is to defend some of those other players. So for me personally, once you get past Edgerrin Cooper, you're talking about possibly Peyton Wilson being the second linebacker off the board, which could possibly vault him into the top 50.
By the time we get to the draft, Brinson is going to have pumped up Peyton Wilson so much that he's going to be the number 1 overall pick. That is obviously where we're headed. That's actually where he is right now. He is driving a giant truck with Peyton Wilson's head on the side. He drives it around Raleigh, North Carolina, 23 hours a day, hosts this podcast. The other one. And look, we have my guy, J.J. McCarthy. You know what? Watching the quarterbacks was actually a ton of fun. We're talking about Michael Penix. It looked great throwing the football. Obviously, we mentioned his injuries are a huge concern, and that's something that teams will have to take into account. Joe Milton throwing the football was absolutely bonkers with a 70-yard completion that traveled 70 yards in the air. That literally does not happen in the NFL. I did some research over the weekend, and the longest pass thrown air yardage wise and completed since 2000 was a Patrick Mahomes preseason pass that traveled 68.6 yards in the air. And the longest regular season pass, I believe, was the PJ Walker Hail Mary in that Falcons-Panthers game a year or two ago. And that traveled 67.8 yards, I believe. So you just don't see air yard completions that long. But anyway, J.J. McCarthy is where I'm going. This taking a couple, the circuitous route here. Yeah.
It's funny because we started this podcast talking about the kickoff rule changes. when we're watching a game, we're always talking about where you need to get to be in range for a kicker. Now with the new kickoff rules, you're always in range for Joe Milton to throw a touchdown pass. That's the kind of arm strength that he was able to show in Indianapolis. Struggled with the accuracy and the consistency a little bit, which is what we had seen on tape. But as far as being entertaining and having a strong arm, there was nobody that was able to stack up to Joe Milton at the end of the day. Although, to support your claim, your pick of J.J. McCarthy, he had the second highest rated velocity at the combine this past week. Joe Milton got up to 62 miles per hour, and then J.J. McCarthy was 61 miles per hour. So a little bit stronger of an arm than what maybe people expected.
So JJ has a nice fastball. So I saw a little bit of buzz that maybe he could be the third quarterback taken. Are you buying that, or do you think he's pretty solidly going to be the fourth QB taken?
No, I think he could be the third quarterback taken. Absolutely. Because if you're talking about him as a top 10 overall selection, then you have to be comfortable with him as a top 5 overall selection too. These teams are going to have convictions about these players. Some of them are going to have them rated differently. There's no unanimous order dependent upon who you talk to in the NFL. So if one team values him as a top 10 overall pick, then you have to be comfortable in the top 5 as well, because this is the game's most important position. So if somebody is worthy of a top 10 pick, then they are certainly worthy of earlier consideration as well. Now, how does that translate to the pecking order as far as Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels? I absolutely think that he could be one of the top 3 quarterbacks taken, although I personally am still more comfortable around like the 10 to 15 range for him at this point.
All right, there we have it. 3 guys who killed it at the Combine. This crushed the Combine segment has been brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. All right, Josh, we are going to close this out by bringing up the big uglies, the offensive linemen. Look, you were there. It's kind of tough. I didn't see much from the offensive linemen because I think most of that happened on my wife's birthday, which was Sunday, and she really frowns upon me watching the Combine on her birthday. I don't know why. I'm just like, look, there's dudes running around in tight shirts. It seems like right up your alley. Wasn't buying it, so it didn't happen. So why don't you tell me, give me 2 winners and a loser from the offensive line?
Yeah, so for the offensive line, I have to look at Talise Fuaga, the offensive tackle from Oregon State. I thought he did fantastic in the on-field drills. When you're talking about the top offensive tackle prospects in this class, it's always been Joe Alt from Notre Dame and Olu Fashanu from Penn State. And for me, it's still Alt as that OT1, but I think there's room in the conversation for Fuaga as being the second-rated offensive tackle and a top 10 pick in this draft class. Just a mauler at the right tackle position, somebody that's going to bury you in the run game if you allow him. You have to, you have to strap up your pads every single time you get out there. Make sure your mouth guard is in because he's going to bring it every single play. Troy Fontenot, the left tackle from Washington, a lot of people thought that he was going to certainly project inside at the next level. I think he has shown that he is more than capable of holding up on the edge. At least give him that opportunity initially. And then if it doesn't work out, you've got yourself a fantastic guard. But what he did in the on-field drills, I thought was incredibly crisp and incredibly clean, had good pad level. So I think he's a player that is going to be taken in the top 20 all day long. As far as players that, maybe could have helped themselves a little bit more, I don't necessarily know that it's someone that hurt themselves as much as it was just how well others performed. And that's Fashanu. He had smaller hands. So, how is that going to impact his punch placement, his pace? How is that going to allow him to dictate action at the point of contact? When you look at what Fuaga and Joe Alt and, J.C. Latham measured like a pterodactyl in this draft class, Amarius Mims looked like a Greek god. So when you look at all of these tackle prospects, where does Fashanu fit in at this point in time? Last year, I think he was probably the first or the second tackle off the board. Now in a very deep tackle class, you're talking about the possibility that he's the 5th tackle off the board, which, in the grand scheme of things is a lot of money.
It is, but the good news for him is being the 5th tackle off the board could still get you selected in the first round. And I love that. Imagine saying, hey, describe these guys in 2 words or less. And you're like, this guy's a pterodactyl. This guy's a Greek god. And that guy has small hands. So you know which one Josh would not be drafting. Josh, I'm glad you made it back from Indy safely. That will do it for today's podcast. We're back on Tuesday with a special episode with Brinson and Dews at 4 p.m. Eastern to talk about the franchise tag deadline. Do not miss that. Set an alarm, set an alert, set something, tattoo on your face. I don't care. Remind yourself that it's coming tomorrow. Give us a like, give us a comment, do something on YouTube, subscribe to our page. We are happy with anything. Download, follow, subscribe. You know the drill. Leave a 5-star review. For Josh, I am John Breech, and I guess Will Brinson for him too. We'll see you guys tomorrow.